We are transitioning to an integrated system plan approach, and this really stems from the Washington Decarbonization Act for Large Utilities, or House Bill 1589, that passed earlier this year. Part of that bill recognizes that we have a number of legacy planning processes that really need to change for us to be better positioned to meet our clean energy goals. And so part of what that bill does is it streamlines several of our existing planning processes, and you've heard about the IRP and the CEIP before. It brings them together into a single integrated system plan that we will file for the first time at the beginning of 2027. Now, what does integrated system plan mean? I mean, that's something we'll still be figuring out the scope of over the next few months, but just big picture conceptually, an integrated system plan, aims to pull together a decarbonization plan across both our gas and our electric utility, with the transmission needs, the distribution system needs, and the energy supply needs really looked at and evaluated together as part of that analysis. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So far, so good on the internet. So we filed a petition that you may have seen in our previous updates to the Commission last month to really seek to begin to consolidate those different planning processes that we've had for a while now. Specifically, we asked the Commission to waive our filing requirements in 2025 for our Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, and our Clean Energy Implementation Plan, CEIP, that so many of you have worked with us on that 2021 CEIP and the biennial update. In making this request, we needed to include a work plan, and the work plan needed to demonstrate reasonable progress towards meeting our clean energy and equity goals under CETA. And we can put a link to that work plan in the chat. I think we did share it with you via email earlier. And it might be worth taking a look at because it really does a nice job of telling the story of some of the progress we've made to date. We also have begun, while our petition was with the Commission, we both began initially planning for what a 27 ISP could look like, while also continuing critical work on the 2025 IRP. Because there really wasn't certainty, that the petition would be approved by the Commission, and then if it was approved, just when the timing of that would happen. So if you could go to the next slide, I think you may already know the punchline, which is that our petition was approved last week on July 11th by the Commission. Specifically, the Commission found that the work plan we gave them demonstrated reasonable progress, both towards meeting CETA's requirements and achieving our equity goals. And related to this, the Commission has already begun a rulemaking process where they develop rules to implement the broad provisions of House Bill 1589. They began that, last month with a kickoff workshop, and that'll last over the next year and wrap up in July of 2025. So if we can go to the next slide, just pivoting to talk about what happens now. As I mentioned before, we've already started working and thinking about what this 2027 ISP will look like. And we're really building off of the efforts we've made over the past year or so on our 2025 integrated resource plan. Those rules that the Commission are developing are also going to be important for some of the parameters of this first integrated system plan. And then in the near term, we plan to engage with all of our advisory groups, especially the EAG, on what engagement should look like. So talking to advisory groups about what topics should be included. This is a broader scope than a traditional integrated resource plan, and we always feel like we have a lot of topics to cover in that forum, and this integrated system plan is broader than that. So we really want input and feedback on what topics to prioritize for discussion, and that will help inform the development of an ISP engagement plan. And that is something the Commission is looking for us to file by the end of October. And I'm going to blink, and it's going to be the beginning of October, it feels like, but it's still summer, so I'm going to take that back. We've got time, but time goes. And then we'll have more information to share with you, both on this ISP effort and some topics to get your feedback on during the September meeting. And so this was really just hopefully a high-level sense of kind of what's to come. And we really look forward to working with you on developing this ISP effort, which will be new for us. And that plan's important because it will take us through one of the next key milestones in our clean energy journey, which is reaching greenhouse gas neutrality by 2030. So we're excited to be working on this with you. And Sophie, I might pause there and take questions before I talk about feedback, because that feels a little different, related but different.
I had the same thought. So new legislation, rulemaking happening, changing the way PSE is planning. Let's hear from you all if you have any questions, concerns about for that. See, go ahead.
Right. What's the
I think you're going to report out on the feedback that you've
Yeah,
been receiving.
I think I have one more slide if we could go there. And really just wanted to touch a little bit on kind of what we've heard from the series of conversations we've held over the last couple of months with this advisory group, with our resource planning advisory group, on how we're thinking about equity analysis in the context of the integrated resource plan. And now as we pivot to an integrated system plan, we're still thinking about what that equity analysis may look like. So, on the electric utility side, some of the feedback we heard from all of you and the resource planning advisory group was we heard some general support for the updates we were proposing, which, just as a refresher, we talked a bit about introducing a more qualitative assessment into the potential burdens and benefits as we look at generic electric resources in a modeling effort. And we also talked about updating the scoring methodology in our portfolio equity assessment. And so we heard some general support for kind of the direction we were headed in. The main concerns we heard, and we really appreciated sort of the constructive dialogue we had at both tables. We heard some concerns about the metrics we're using in the portfolio benefit analysis and how they may differ in their relative impacts. Several different parties showed interest in us moving towards a more nuanced approach beyond the binary scoring method that we talked about. So that could look like weighting of metrics. That could mean using a more granular scoring scale than the 0-1 we had used. We also heard concerns, some concerns regarding some of the metrics we're proposing, and not all of this feedback is consistent. So, I mean, we heard different points of view, right? So we're going to have to take a lot of this under advisement as we move towards the ISP and bring forward some further ideas. But some of the things we heard was some of the metrics may be too correlated, so we may be measuring the same thing multiple times. And then we had some folks that wanted to see additional metrics measured, and other folks were saying, well, maybe we should scale back the number of metrics we have to really focus more on those customer benefit indicators, or CBIs. So it's probably hard to do both, but we're taking both comments under advisement as we think about this. And then on the gas utility side, we had proposed a new equity assessment for the gas utility that was modeled after the portfolio benefit analysis we'd done on the electric side. And we heard similar themes of feedback related to the gas utility. We heard folks suggesting we reconsider how we score different gas resources, and also emphasizing we should ensure that there's some uniqueness in our metrics so that we would minimize that risk that we're double counting things. And then we also just heard feedback that it would be great to align metrics we use on the gas side with those on the electric side. So given all that great feedback, which we really, really appreciate, and that we're pivoting to this ISP approach, I think we need to sit with this a little bit, and we anticipate that we may revise our equity strategy a little bit, given this feedback and given that we're moving towards a broader plan. So we anticipate we'll re-engage with all of you in the future. Not quite sure what month that is yet, but we're very committed to just continuing the dialogue and the conversation and having a lot of different diverse groups involved in helping us develop what this equity strategy looks like for the ISP. So thanks everybody, and happy to take questions if there are any.
Question in the chat from C.
Yeah.
C was wondering, was the feedback that you're talking about on the slide from prior EAG meetings, or is it also from other groups?
So great question. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that. It's from both. See, so this is some of the themes we heard from all of you in the equity advisory group meetings, but we also sought feedback from our resource planning advisory group meeting. And I think we might have even had a public webinar where we heard feedback as well. I'd have to go back and double check. So this really is from both advisory groups having a couple of meetings really on this area. Hope that helps.
Yeah. Other questions or comments for Kara on the feedback that PSE has received on the equity analysis approach? Very good. Okay, well, Kara, thanks for your time. Thank you to the internet fairies that cooperated. Right. Let's go to the next slide, Will. Perfect. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael in a moment. I'll note that Michael's going to do kind of a high-level overview, and then your breakout rooms will be a chance to maybe dig into some of the details. So let's spend, I don't know, 10 or so minutes to 20 minutes in presentation mode, and then we'll have about 20 minutes in breakout mode. So take it away, Michael.
All right, thank you, Sophie, and hello, everybody. Michael Whaling, the Energy Equity Program Manager of Data Analytics. My pronouns are he, him. Happy to present to you tonight. And we'll be actually doing a little bit of a front information here for just a couple slides, and then going into a simulation experience too that I think will help you engage with our content as we're going forward. And Sophie, I'll just let you know, I'm limited. I can see the slides, but if there's comments or things that come up, I could use your support in terms of just calling out if there's questions or things. So please interrupt me as you would.
I come from a loud Jewish family. We're really good at interrupting, so we'll take care of that.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, well, let's go on to the next slide then. And so we'll start out with all of y'all at the EAG, and our question or request for you is, as we go through the material tonight and involve you in some of the concepts and that sort of thing, when we get to the end, we'll be asking for your suggestions and recommendations. How would you improve what we've done with our distributional equity analysis approach, and any factors you think might be missing from the analysis? And we'll speak more to that at the very end. But I just wanted to give you a heads up on the front end of the presentation of, what is it we're asking for? And then just call your attention to the picture on the left side is a picture of our community solar installation at Olympia High School, which is featured as part of one of our distributional equity analysis project sites. So that gives you an idea of what one of them looks like. All right, we can move on to the next slide. All right, and thank you to Dennis for mentioning the procedural justice quadrant earlier tonight. Just a couple of things about this slide. We'll be focusing on, obviously, the distributional justice quadrant, since it is a distributional equity assessment. And I'll be speaking more in just a minute about what that actually is in this context. But the procedural justice quadrant also plays a really important part. And I want to call that out now, because that was one of our primary learnings as we went through the pilot. And again, I'll give you more information about that. But I wanted to give you, just focus on those two quadrants of our model. I want to also on this slide, I believe the EAG is pretty familiar with the model overall, but you can see that this is how PSE as well thinks about energy equity with the four quadrants coming from the energy equity project associated with the University of Michigan. So that's our model for how we implement equity. And I also would like to associate this slide with what we call a cascade order, which was guidance given that we'll speak about on the next slide, which informs all Washington utilities about how we are to respond to an energy equity in our regulatory space. So if there's no questions here, we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. All right, this is a very busy slide. So several things I want to talk about. First, I want you to think about it as if you've ever been to a shopping mall and you've seen one of those maps where all the stores are, you notice on the bottom left side, we are here. So we're going to start over there on floor 1. And then there's a vertical line in the middle, and that's kind of floor 2 over on the other side. And I also want to give a shout of appreciation to Megan Walsh. Megan, you made some comments in the last EAG meeting talking about neurodiverse audiences. And so we've tried to take these sets of slides we're going through and implement some of those recommendations. So I hope you find some themes that you mentioned in practice here and that's helpful as we go through the presentation. So starting on floor 1 or the left side, you can see at the very top, we have the WUTC, Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, which governs investor-owned utilities statewide. And we're moving through time from the top is in the past, towards the middle present and bottom future. And there are 2 different channels that are coming down. So as I mentioned on the last slide, with the 4 quadrants of energy equity. There, in the cascade order, utilities were instructed through that docket that each utility would have to consider equity in that each action or investment or opportunity is either advancing equity or hindering equity. They use different exact words for that, but that there's no neutrality basically, and utilities need to be prepared to explain and document how they're going about that. And of course, we use the 4 quadrants as our model about how to do that. As we move forward in time from the past, the reason why we're doing a distributional equity assessment is because it was a part of our general rate case, or GRC, that we filed in 2022, and we received an order from the commission that we could go ahead with that GRC, provided that we performed a distributional equity analysis. And so then that brings us down to that last balloon there, that we are here. But over just to the right, you'll notice that there's another docket coming down from the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, which is the equity docket. And that is a bigger process that provides guidance for all of the investor-owned utilities in Washington. And so that is a process that we anticipate will probably end in 2026. And each year is looking at a quadrant. This year is looking at the procedural quadrant, and next year we'll be looking at the distributional quadrant. So we're kind of in the perfect space right now to be talking about the distributional equity assessment and gathering your recommendations and information and feedback. So what we anticipate is going to happen is, with our distributional equity assessment, that it will be moved over into that larger docket at some point. And it's just important to note that we're in that process because we're waiting to receive information back about the methodology that we demonstrated. And as Kara just described in some of the metrics and discussion that was going on, we want to make sure that we're in that conversation of, are we performing this correctly? Are there other considerations we need to conclude before we go further with the methodology? So that is the state context and where we are in time, with kind of 2 different sets of proceedings that we're juggling or managing between. In order to perform the distributional equity assessment, we're going to move over to floor 2 on the right side of the screen at the nationwide stage. And so what we did is, in order to find guidance for how to perform a distributional equity assessment, we did some literature research and looked at who was working in that space, and identified Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, which is one of 17 different national labs under the United States Department of Energy. So they were working on some theoretical inquiries into the space of distributional equity assessments, and we contacted them and said, we'd like to work with some advisement with you. And they said, great, this is an opportunity to move theory into practice. We could use this study, this DEA, or distributional equity assessment, as a case study. And that would help us take some of these ideas and thoughts and move them into practice with some tangible parts and pieces and see how that works. So Lawrence Berkeley National Labs was the go-between between PSE and the United States Department of Energy. So they kind of captained the project or guided the project, and we worked with them. And then over on the right side, I'm just kind of calling out, they formed an advisory board, and people were invited from all these different organizations. Not everybody was able to make the meetings and attend, but the advisory board was convened from a broad variety of perspective. We had representatives from state commissions outside of Washington. We had members of academia, some consultants. We had folks from another utility there. I think it was Southern California Edison, and nonprofits, as well as some other commissioners.
Michael, can I just
Sure.
Can I just break in, just in case some of you are having trouble looking at the chat? I want to just recognize that Chris wrote, great way to make the case for PSE's leadership in utilizing the distribution of equity inclusion through these valuable assessments. Good job. And C was reminding everyone that GRC is a general rate case. So just the acronym piece of there. All right, we're updated on the chat now. So go ahead, Michael.
Great. Yes, and sorry for that oversight. We should have spelled that out earlier. But anyway, I would like, just going back to floor 2 over here on the national stage, to sum up what I've been saying is we looked for expertise across the country in order to inform the methodology that we're doing. And we worked with those folks in order to create the product, which is the assessment methodology that we're going to talk about tonight. So again, that comes back to our state context over on the left. We're here and we're kind of out in front of the larger process. So just so everybody has that context, because that is, I think, important when we get to the very end and ask for your recommendations, that you understand where we are. All right, that's a lot of thoughts about policy pieces and puzzles. If there's any questions that people have, I'd be happy to take them. And I also do want to move forward if we can, because we want to move into the activity as soon as we can.
Yeah. Questions for Michael or comments on kind of the big picture, the map, the mall map, if you will? Okay, Michael, you can roll on forward.
All right, next slide. All right, this one is an anchor slide for us tonight because it really illustrates what the tool is that is a DEA, or distributional equity assessment. So again, our slide is divided into 2 halves, the left and the right. On the left side, we have some narrative that is describing what's called a benefit cost analysis and then a DEA. And let me just summarize. A benefit cost analysis is when we've done that many years in the utility industry, where we look at, okay, if we want to buy something or finance something, what are all the benefits that's going to bring to our customers? Will it deliver value for what it's supposed to do? And at what cost will that be? And if the benefits outweigh the cost threshold, then we can go ahead and purchase that or add that to our resources. And if the costs are too high, then that means we're going to not purchase that resource because it wouldn't be affordable and efficient. So that's just kind of a high-low on the BCA side of things, to simplify it. What's important to understand about the DEA, or distributional equity assessment, is in that blue box on the left side where it says priority populations and other customers. We're adding a new lens or a new vision into that affordability of it. Is it affordable and delivers benefits or not? Not only are we considering that, but now we're adding a horizontal or left to right axis to say, well, when something is affordable or not, how does that affect all the customers, especially if we put a focus on a priority population? And a priority population is like, it's like a variable in a math equation. It could mean a lot of different things. Our audience here with the EAG is familiar with our context of highly impacted communities and highly vulnerable populations, or vulnerable populations, and maybe perhaps deepest need from some of the content we've talked about before. Those could be priority populations. We could also, in another assessment, be looking at maybe a specific vulnerability with perhaps elderly customers who have higher exposure to climate change factors. That might be a priority population. Are they getting a share of a resource? So you could define it in many ways. But what a DEA does is say, what is going to be the effect or benefit on that part of the population versus the rest of the customer population? So moving over to the right side of the slide, we can think about where you see BCA going up and down on the sideways blue bar there, kind of that vertical axis of, is it affordable and does it deliver the value that we want it to? And if it's above in the top half of the box there, that means yes, it does. And then when you look at the DEA results rectangle on the bottom that goes left to right, if it is an action that is worsening equity, it's going to end over in the left half of the rectangle. So that goes back to the cascade order again. We're either improving equity or we're making it worse. If it's on the right half of the rectangle, that means equity is improved. So you can think about, even though it's just a static rectangle there with 4 quadrants in it, kind of like when you use your camera on your phone to take a picture and you move it around, and if yours is like mine, it has a little circle that lights up when you get it just right and says, take the picture now. And what we're trying to do is land in that top right corner where it says DER should be approved, because that means we have accounted for equity and we are improving it, and it also is cost effective or above that middle line there. Now, what it does add is that maybe something is affordable over there in the top left corner, but it's not improving equity. So then if that is the result you get, you want to reconsider, is there a change we could make in what we're doing that would improve equity where we can move the result over to the right side? And that might be creating a new program. It might be adjusting some of the parameters of the program or some other outcome, or dismissing that particular effort as saying we can't invest in this, it's not equitable. And the same thing over there on the bottom right corner, where it's not affordable, but it would be improving equity. Is there anything we can do or something we could change that would nudge it up above that line so it lands up in the top right corner? So again, that's the crux of what this tool does. It gives us a way, a second vision to look at our cost analysis and to bring an equity lens into how we evaluate things. And that's what we will be looking to apply from this methodology as we go forward in time as a utility. So I just want to anchor that for a moment. And this is, again, an important one. If there's any questions here before we move on to the next one, I'd be happy to explain further.
Yeah. So
Sure. All right. Now we're changing seats here a little bit. I'm setting you all up in the DEA to get your hands dirty a little bit with some of the material. Don't worry, it's going to be a little complex, but I'm confident that you'll do well with it. So what we're going to ask you to do is to put together a DEA or to frame one up. And we're going to give you some content in the breakout rooms in order to do that. So on this slide here, there are going to be 5 components to the DEA you're going to construct. And let me just say, a DEA in this sense is a lot like a recipe. And you may end up in your group deciding to bake a cake, and the other group may end up deciding to make a chili. And they're both similar in that they're going to be using these components, but you'll have different ingredients and you might choose to measure things differently because of that. So what is important to know in this recipe, there is going to be something called a system role, which is looking at a DER and what function is it going to serve. And you'll have some choices to choose between, does that have to do with reliability or resilience or affordability? And we'll make that more clear in your instructions. You'll select a priority population from among a series of choices about who you want to set aside as the group of focus compared to the other customers. You'll be given some choices about a project location, where it's going to be. And the important thing there is what is the information about the physical infrastructure of the electric system and how that's different at different locations, and how does that overlap with the customer characteristics of that site. You'll be looking at the procedural quadrant in terms of what type of community-based organization are you going to approach and work with for that feedback and engagement in your project. And then you'll also select a metric, which is what is the thing that's going to measure and tell you and indicate if the priority population is experiencing the outcome you're desiring to frame up in your project. So there are no wrong choices. There will be choices in there. There's a lot of different creative outcomes that could be a part of it. You will have either Katie or myself in your room as a resource to provide more context and more tools and directions that'll be provided when we get there. So if you don't understand everything yet, that's okay. And we can go ahead to the next slide. And I think Will is going to jump in at this point.
Thanks so much, Michael. Yeah, so I think I first want to share that this is intended to be a discussion. And so please ask questions. Want to reiterate that there are no wrong answers. We'll be using a Miro board, the same Miro board in each of the 2 groups, to drag and drop each of the selections that Michael was just talking about. What I'm going to drop in the chat now is some detailed definitions and instructions for this breakout room. And again, this is for your reference as you're looking at the terms on the Miro, just to have some background context. But again, Michael and Katie will be there to provide any sort of technical assistance and answer the questions that you have. but Kim will be creating the breakout rooms, and then we'll be dividing folks evenly.
And plan on 20 minutes for the breakout. And if everyone could open the breakouts, answering Megan's question is, can you tell us what you'd like to get out of this exercise? So as you're going to your rooms, making sure that Will and Seth as facilitators just start with that goal.
Respect the fact that you want to go back into the breakout rooms and have some more time. I also want to make sure we're saving time for the rest of the presentation, because I think the rest of the presentation really provides some information about 2 projects that we actually went through with this pilot, so folks can get a chance to see what we really wrestled with there. And I think that could be very helpful. And then for sure, this is going to be the only topic we cover for the rest of the meeting to make sure we do it justice. And then Michael, as you go into the presentation part, I would encourage you to sort of focus on the practical information, and maybe we, keep it at that level so that folks can see the 2 projects we actually worked with as part of this pilot.
Thanks for that, Troy, for that guidance. Let's just do kind of maybe finish your thought 10 minutes in the breakout room. So 6:26 to 6:36, and then use the rest of the meeting for Michael to step through the example. So being nimble here on the fly. So Kim, I believe room 1 had C, Dennis, Emma, and Elizabeth, and room 2 had D'Amico, TJ, Megan, and Christopher. And I think you're on top of it, as you always are. We'll do another 10 minutes. Thanks for being nimble and flexible, everyone, and come back 6:37. For about, you have about 10-15 minutes here to kind of walk through these applications and take it away.
Sure. And I hope there was some value for everybody. Let me just say in the exercise, obviously we'd hoped it'd go a little smoother and been continuous, but even just working with some of the components, I think gave you a little more experience of what's involved in putting together a DEA. And I'm going to tell you the story now of what we did to develop the methodology with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories. So we had 80 megawatts of resources that are part of our clean energy plan. And we picked a representative sample that we could focus on in order to develop a DEA methodology. And so we focused on 2 sites. One, the Olympia High School, which you saw a picture of at the very beginning of our time together. And the other is at a site in the Nooksack Indian tribe that hasn't been built yet. And what I really want to focus on here in this table is that time frame column that you see. Notice that for the Olympia High School, it's retrospective. So we're looking backwards in time at a project that was already built. And then we're looking at the outcomes for the priority population and other populations that we already have some data for. In contrast to that, for the Nooksack Indian tribe, we were looking in a prospective perspective or forward looking. So the project hasn't been built yet, and we're going to analyze the area and 2 different project sites to compare them to see how would that benefit a priority population differently depending on which site was picked. There's a little bit more complexity to the Nooksack Indian tribe site in that one site, it later came out in the procedural dimension, that there was interest in including a battery storage feature to that site. And so that differentiated it, and that would be the apartment complex versus the administrative building site. So 2 different sites we evaluated and looked at how would that affect the priority populations on where they were. So if there's no questions on the framing of those 2 different site locations and then 2 options within the Nooksack site, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so priority populations, we had a question come up in our breakout room, like what do you do first? And it's very important to get your priority population identified as part of your analysis, and that you involve that priority population all the way through how you develop your metrics and in your procedural quadrant of how you engage the design of the project. And particularly, that was a big learning for us working with the Nooksack Indian tribe about both doing the analysis and then bringing in information that was brought forward by the community. And that affected the interpretation of how the decision will probably go and where the site will actually be built. But so you can see the stages here. You identify your priority population, and then we weren't able to get to the metric selection, but you're trying to measure what is the outcome that you want to see. Is it improving or not improving for that priority population? And then apply that to your priority population in order to get back to that tool we talked about a few slides earlier before the exercise with the 4 quadrants. Is it a cost benefit effective? Can we purchase this resource? And is it improving equity or not improving equity? So this helps set that up by identifying your priority population and the metric that you're measuring it on. All right, and we can go to the next slide if there's no questions here.
Michael, I'll just articulate what's in the chat. C was asking about what is that fancy word for it? A story map, and we just added the link in the chat, and it was also just provided with some handout materials. So take a look in your free time.
Okay.
No other questions that I'm seeing at this time, Michael. Great.
So in our approach, I think we're backtracking or well, going here a little bit. Remember that we had the, working with LB&L and the national experts advising us on how to put it together. So we were using the frame of the 4 energy quadrants from the Energy Equity Project. And then we were applying it to a representative sample. And we just walked through the Olympia High School as well as the Nooksack Indian Tribe sites. And so we're taking our tangible data and moving from theory, which is represented by the 2 documents you see on the right from LB&L and the researchers that were involved in developing the methodology, and applying it to a tangible or real place and seeing what kind of results we would get with that. And then you can see, let's see the very last one there. We plan to use this methodology in the future upon getting further feedback and guidance about how to implement it further. Again, going back to when Kara was talking about some of the feedback in the other process as well, we want to make sure we've included all that information before we move forward and implement it. So that was our approach to the design of our distributional equity assessment. I think we can go to the next slide. And this is a crux here, again, going back to what Dennis shared, the theme for our meeting today in the procedural quadrant. Even though this is a distributional equity assessment, we really learned a lot in our engagement with the Nooksack Indian tribe. So it's worth highlighting that here on this slide. The Department of Energy was already engaged with the Nooksack tribe in their energy transitions partnership. And so because that relationship was already going on, and they're strategically mapping out with the Nooksack tribe what is the future that you want for your energy reality as a community. And so they were working together on that, and we got invited in as part of our project to participate with that site selection in the procedural equity dimension. And so I was not there personally myself, but those who were part of the project that were there talked about they got this guidance from being a part of that community during the couple of days that was going on, that you're invited. We worked with a qualified facilitator who was experienced and invited by the tribe to work in that context. We were invited to describe both the participants were invited to describe their lived experience as well as their professional experience as part of building trust in the procedural exchange, and to engage as an active listener and be primarily a listener to what the tribe community or the tribal community was bringing forward. And that had an important effect on the outcome that we'll talk about later. But just really important to highlight that even though there's a lot of metrics and data and numbers, this element is very important and one of our key learnings in the distributional equity assessment process or methodology. And we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so here we're seeing the application of the metrics to the priority populations. And so we'll start over on the Olympia project on the left. And notice in there we have two columns, the general population and the income eligible population. And so what we're looking at there is then moving through the middle table, there are some metrics that we're looking to measure. How is equity improved or not improved, and which population would it be applied to in this case? And so that first one, looking at the count of participating customers and that there are income eligible customers that are participating in the community solar project through that program. The next one, looking at the amount of energy burn. We didn't actually track that in this project, but how it would be applied to the income eligible population on the Olympia site. The next one, the culturally linguistic accessible program and communications for named communities didn't apply because it was a retrospective. It had already been implemented. In this case, we could evaluate the reduced greenhouse gas emissions from the technology, and the outages and access to clean, reliable energy with emergency power did not apply in the Olympia project scenario. Then looking over at the Nooksack sites for Whispering Cedars and Administrative Building, you can see that when we looked at the metrics for the equity assessment, the distributional equity assessment, that the Whispering Cedars population scored on more of those metrics in terms of it applying to them versus at the administration building. So it's just a matrix that shows when you apply the metrics, how do they map to your priority populations that you've identified. And so if we can go to the next slide. And this was a finding in the methodology of, what are the benefit or the positives and drawbacks for each type of approach, whether you're looking as a retrospective analysis in the past or prospective analysis into the future. And we found, working with the Olympia data, you already have a tangible data set. So you can measure those impacts to priority populations and, consider like, well, what if we changed the program and had changed, maybe an incentive amount here, that sort of thing. We can project what kind of outcome would that have had in the past if that condition had been changed. The drawbacks or the cons to the retrospective analysis is that you can't set intentional goals for that program because it's already been occurring in the past, and it's harder to identify intentional populations for the project when it's already been in place. So you're looking at the historical past and then thinking about, well, how might that apply in the future to another project location or program design? On the other side, in the forward-looking analysis, you can say, all right, for this program in the Nooksack site, for example, we can have some goals that we're looking to enroll a certain amount of deepest need customers or meet that population's need. And identify that particular population ahead of time in the design of building the program out and build it out to meet that need or that goal. And the difficult part there is you don't necessarily know what exactly is going to happen with the program impacts until you've actually started the program and the enrollments and can see what are the effects as they begin to happen in time. And it can be challenging. One part is managing the physical project, so the technology that's going to be built and the schedule and the permitting and all that stuff, and bringing that timeline into synchronicity with the engagement of the priority population and interested parties and interested communities to bring that whole process together was a challenge in that particular case.
Michael, just if you have 2 more minutes to wrap up so we can
Sure.
ask EAGs a quick question. Go ahead.
Okay, can we go to the next slide then? So where we're at right now, and kind of going back to that first slide with the equity docket, we anticipate that we are going to take this methodology and apply it to all different kinds of programs across PSE. Basically, anywhere we can consider a benefit cost analysis, we could add an equity dimension to that, whether we're looking at our energy efficiency programs or assistance programs, infrastructure programs, all those examples that are listed here. And again, we've brought forward the methodology, we've reported it, and now we're waiting for feedback on the methodology itself to determine next steps of how we will apply it going forward. In addition, LBNL has taken our case study and published their tools on the website for the Department of Energy to make that available for as a resource across the nation for the utilities, for other regulators and interested parties and so on.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. It seems like there's many potential applications. So in the last, 7 or 8 minutes here, if EAG members wouldn't mind just turning their cameras on, because we have just a question that we want to end on hearing from you all. And that question is, you had a chance to try on this approach in breakout rooms. You heard from Michael. What's your feedback for PSE on this? Do you have any recommendations about how this might change? Are there factors missing from this analysis? Let's hear from you all if you